Okay, so we're going to take a look at Haley's first. And you can see this from the looking at this part right here. Things look pretty good. What happens is that just something to keep in mind. I feel like we're starting to lose quite a bit of texture in here in the suit. So you get into the highlights right here. It seems like part of that is really beginning to go. So remember, even if you lose texture completely in something, most of the time we think about when we're doing split frequency work, we're thinking about replacing texture, but if there's absolutely zero texture, you can also add texture, so you can bring it in even though it doesn't exist. So if we take a look at, for instance, some area over here, like I'm going to look at the part that's right underneath the suit right here. If we take a look where this is, I'm going to turn off her high layer right here, and that's actually showing me where part of this is actually missing. But here, we'll zip into this little part right down here. So here it's pretty lost in this part right here. If I turn off this high layer, that's where it actually is. I'm going to select the high copy layer right here. I'm going to go to the clone stamp tool. Again, that's the tool that you want to be doing all of your high work on, and a relatively hard clone stamp tool, because again, you're trying to restore texture or detail, or you're modifying texture and detail. And in this case, you don't want these like really soft edges where you ultimately are replacing some of the texture and not all of it, so you end up mixing new texture with old texture, which is basically just screwing texture up. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, hold down the Option key. I'm going to sample texture from right here, and then this is a trick that I do a lot. You'll notice I'm going to come down here to try to fix this part or try to add texture back into this part. But one of the problems that you run into is if you're doing this on a big area, you run out of space. So for instance, if I started the texture tool right here, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to sample up here. I'm going to restore some texture up here, even though I don't think it really need it, but you'll see what it is, the problem that I'm going to run into. So I'm going to click and drag this down, and it does texture down there. What have you got going on here? Sorry. Something happened that I didn't expect to happen, so I'm just trying to figure out what's really going on here. Because that did... So what? Oh, yeah. Well, I can see it in here, so we'll try this one again. Yeah, alright, let's try this again. Yeah, that's pulling texture right now. But what ends up happening is that I run out of texture. So again, it's a really small little spot right here. So if you uncheck aligned for this, every time you actually let go of your mouse, it's going to come back to this area that's got texture in it. It won't try to actually build using texture down here where you've got the seam and all of that other part going. So again, with this unaligned, watch what happens to my cursor. I'm gonna work on this area down here, and you can see the X that was right up here showing you where that sample line part is coming from. But if I let go and actually move around, it doesn't matter where I move around, it's always going back to that same spot. So if you find a place that actually does have good texture in it, it's easier to do it that way. to make it more obvious, I'm going to sample this area that's right up on the top of her boob. The problem with this, though, is that I'm going to sample this texture and then bring it down on the lower part. Focus becomes an issue in this. So if this area up here on the top of her boob is in focus as the area down here, this will work. If it's not, then you end up with a focus mismatch. So we'll see what this looks like. So I'm going to sample up here at the top and come down in here. And then you can see that it makes it much more apparent that's down in here, but it's also because it's more in focus. If you take a look at the area that's really close to this area is nowhere near as sharp or as in focus. So again, this is going to be a focus mismatch for me that I don't really want to tackle. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that and see if I can't grab something that's either maybe even over in this area in here. So I'm going to sample down more on her belly and then come back over to this same area and see if I can't bring more texture in. Yeah, and that actually does a somewhat better job of it. So I'm bringing in more texture now, so this will be my sort of before and after. Snapshot that, say okay, take a look again. But yeah, so it's a way to think about if you lose it, you can actually go back in and restore it. A couple other things that are going on here that I'm not sure about. I'm going to unclip this so that we can see it and turn that off. What's up with this? I don't want to know. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Say what? Sure. Did anybody else run into the same problem? Did you actually copy the stuff off of the server, or were you running it directly from the server? Yeah, but if you're running it off the server, that's always a mistake. You should always copy this stuff to your desktop. There's all sorts of weird permission issues that exist with that server, and that sounds like one of them. So right off the bat, if you can't copy something down, you know that's a permission issue. But if you can get it copied to your desktop, usually it'll avoid all of those issues. But going back and forth with the server is glitchy at best. So we're not actually supposed to have access to this server. We're not supposed to be on it. We're not supposed to be doing any of the shit that we do in this class with that. But how else are we going to do this? I mean, I'm in a class where everybody has to send me their stuff via Smash Transfer. You have no idea the hell that makes my email, because I'm getting shit from everybody, and they're all, these 2-3 gigabyte downloads, and it's just like, yeah, that's not a fun day for me. But at any rate, actually, let's just do this. It's going to be easier. Okay, so if you've got a tablet, wouldn't be a bad time to use it. Not that it's absolutely critical, but again, we're at the stage of the game where you should have a tablet handy for all of the work that you do from this point on. We're going to start with, again, I'm going to give you guys a chance to do that. I just need to find out where the homework is. So this is going to be in our session number 10. In the assignment folder. Yeah, so Pablo, try and copying this entire assignment folder for session 10 down to your desktop first before you try anything on that, and we'll see if the permission problem still exists. Okay, so did everybody get their tablet ready to go? All right, so we're going to start with the images that are in the assignment folder. You can see in my case, I've not only have the raw files, the CR2 files, I've got XMP files as well. That's because I've already done color balancing on this, but it's okay. I'm gonna do it all over again. So even though it already exists I'm going to rewrite over them. If you select all of these, it doesn't matter that you've selected all the XMP files as well. None of that part. When I go to open this, it's not going to say, well, I can't find an application to open this guy. So I'm going to select all of them. There's 5 of them in there. 1, 2, 3. Yep, there are 5 of them in there. I'm sorry? It's in session 10 in your assignment folder for session 10. And all of a sudden this wants to come open up into my imports, into my photos folder. Interesting. I feel like sometimes my computer has got this mind of its own. Because this has never happened before. I've never changed that part. So it's opening it up in Camera Raw, but then it also wants to open it up into photos as well, and that's not what I need it to actually do. So does everybody have this thing opened up? Are we good on this part? All right. So the first frame that we've actually got in here is strictly something that we can't use it for exposure because, again, the white patch on this card is not actually in the lighting that we're doing on the figure or on the background, either one. So it won't work for us to check exposure, our whole 245 to 250. It won't work for that, but it's still completely viable to do color balancing. So that's what I'm going to simply use it for. So I'm going to open up. So does everybody have all of these images in Camera Raw? We good on this? Okay, so I'm going to open up color. I'm going to grab the color sampler, the white balance tool, the little eyedropper that says right next to color. I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on either the one that's the gray patch that's right next to the red or the one that's right next to the green. I'm going to do the one that's right next to the red. So this part actually works for me. And then all I have done in this, I haven't changed anything else in here. If you take a look at your light, the light opening up, actually that may have an auto on it. Yeah, it does have an auto on it. So a lot of times I'll color balance that way. I'm not sure that auto is going to work for me in all of the images where she's rolled over and actually can see the front, but we'll find out right now. So then I'm going to hover over the thumbnail. Again, my thumbnails are on the left-hand side. If yours are on the bottom, it works the same way. Pick the thumbnail and hover over the upper right-hand corner and you'll get 3 little dots. If you click on those 3 little dots, you get a flyout menu and you want to do a select all. That will select all of your other thumbnails. And then go back to those same little 3 dots in that upper right hand corner, click again, and come down and do sync settings. And in the sync settings, I'm going to leave this at its default. The only thing that I'm aware of that we've done in here is we've actually changed the exposure and we've changed the color, both of which are enabled in default. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And it will go through and run and actually do everybody else. However, I don't need to open this image that's got the color card in it. All I needed that for was to actually do the white balance. So, Pablo, were you able to copy all of them down? No, that's good. Hey, that's a positive thing, right? So anyway, I'm going to select the second one down. It doesn't really matter which one of these I select. So I'm just going to go after this image. It's not my final image. If you want to take a look at your final image, it doesn't really matter which one I do this on because I need it to be consistent with all of them. So I'm taking a look at the image. This is the second one down is the image that is really sort of my final image in all of this. And when I did that auto color balance on there, if you hover over your this image again, and again click on the auto button that's right underneath the histogram, it will turn off your auto balance and you'll see that things get a little bit brighter. I don't really need things to get brighter. So again, I'm turning all of this off. I don't need all of that part to actually happen in here. So I'm going to go back up to my original image because this has no longer been synced. I'm going to go back up to my original image that has the color card in it, and I'm going to resync it for everybody. So select all again. I'm just going to go through the same steps again just to make sure that I've got everybody is done exactly the same way. And I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And then I'm going to take a look at this. And I like the way it's actually treated this suit. So if you zoom in tight on this suit, you can see that even in the highlights that are happening along the edges, bright part right here, I've still got texture in here. I'm not really blowing anything out. So I'm feeling good about this, and I know everybody has actually been processed the same way. So the first image, this frame number 53, frame number 59, frame number 63, and then frame number 66. All of these have actually been done correctly. So when I look at my frame that I'm talking about right now to replace the suit in, that frame number 59, I'm going to zip back out just a little bit. One of the issues that I've got with this is the placement. So what I'm going to do is, and this is just a classic trick, it's why as a retoucher, if you are retouching for somebody else, you need to ask those people to give them their entire shooting. Because what I'm going to try to go through here is that there are people in this class who actually use frequency separation to get rid of all these wrinkles. It's really time consuming. It takes a lot of effort. It's like there's better ways to jumpstart that process. But if you don't have any of the other files that are from the shoot, then you don't have the source material to actually try to fix this the way we're going to try to fix this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find other frames in here where the suit actually looks better. It's got less wrinkles in it and is still showing me enough. I'm close enough in the perspective and everything else that I can actually then use that to steal a suit or half of a suit. Because where this really works out ultimately in doing this is that you'll see that there is one frame where the lower half of her body from her boobs to her crotch works in one frame really well, but then to actually redo her boobs is a completely different frame. So that's basically where we're going with all of this. So when I look at this, you can see the suit's pretty wrinkled, but I really care about where I see her crotch here, because if you look at the frame that's right above it, so the frame that's right above it is actually, her crotch area is pretty similar. Her leg positioning is pretty similar. The body of the suit, again, on her stomach from her boobs down is pretty flat. There's a few wrinkles in there, but that's something I can easily take care of using frequency separation. So again, I'm going to use that for the lower part of her suit. And then on the upper part of her suit, if you go down to frame number, the one that's right underneath this, frame number 63, that's actually a pretty good one for her boobs. I'm going to look at the other one that's right below it, possibly even better still. But the one that's the very bottom one right here that I'm saying probably would work pretty good for her boobs, you can see her leg position now has changed and she's covered up that crotch, and there's no way for me to rebuild that. So the frames that I know I'm going to need to do this, to fix this with, I know it's going to be this frame number 53. So I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to hold down my command key. I'm going to click on 59. That's the one that's underneath it. And then finally, I'm going to go down and click on the one that's all the way at the very bottom of this, which is frame number, I think it's 63. I don't know. I can't tell right now. But those are the ones that I'm actually going to open up to do this. You can open these things up as smart objects. You do not have to, the work that we're going to do later on, we can't do on a smart object, but at least in the initial version of what we're going to try to do here, opening these up as smart objects is actually going to be a smart call. So I'm going to go ahead and click on opening those three elements as smart objects. Okay, so I'm going to park this frame number 66. Again, that was really more for the top part of the suit. I'm going to park that off to the side. So I'm just going to click on the yellow stoplight button at the very top and park that over. Frame number 59 is the one that I'm actually working on, but I'm going to steal the suit from frame number 53. I'm going to steal the bottom of the suit for that. So I'm going to zoom in on this guy. And I'm going to simply use the quick selection tool. So again, fourth tool down from the top, the quick selection tool, because we've got a really good contrast edge here. So this should do a really good job at actually making that selection. So I'm going to start at the very top, and I'm simply going to select the entire suit. You need to make sure that you get all of it. If you grab part of the suit down, you can see in mine, it just selected part of the selection down at the very bottom. Hold down your Option key and click to actually deselect that part of it. But then you need to zoom in and make sure that your selection actually reached the edges. So if you'll take a look at my screen right now, you can see it actually got part of the bottom of the selection, but it didn't get all of it. So I'm going to go back and actually select the rest of this. And then again, it's selecting part of her skin right now. So I'm holding down the Option key to simply tighten that part up. I don't worry too much about this though, because again, I'm going to puppet warp this guy. I'm going to take a look at everything else. Everything else is fine. Again, if you get up all the way up sorry, Option key to clean that up a little bit. I'm selected everything that I'm going to need because again, I'm going to use a different image for the top. So this is a reasonably good selection. I'm going to simply jump that to its own layer, Command J. And if you double click on the hand, hold down the eyeball for the background layer, you can see that we've basically just isolated the suit. So this is basically what I've got going on here. And this should actually work out pretty well for me. I'm going to convert this to a smart object right now because I am going to transform this. I'm going to warp this. I'm going to be doing a lot of changing in this. And I need to make sure that when I do all of those changes in this that I don't do it destructively. So I'm going to go up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object. You'll see that the little icon of being a smart object is located right down on the lower right hand corner. Then I'm going to grab that layer and drag it on top of my frame number 59. This is my final frame, the frame that I'm trying to fix. Hold down the Shift key and let go, and it will actually bring it in order, in place. Now the frame number 53, where that came from, it's done all its job. I'm going to close it up. I don't need to save it. I don't need to do anything. I just wanted to harvest the suit to actually do this with. Make sense, everyone? All right. I'm going to zip in on this a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is just move it into a general kind of position. So I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm just going to drag it down till it's roughly in kind of the same position. And what I'm really looking for to anchor this are those two rings that are on her hips. That's where I'm going to go after doing this part first. So to do that part of it, or to go ahead and finish this part of it, I am going to go into Puppet Warp for this. So again, I'm working on just the suit layer, up to the image menu, up to the edit menu, down to Puppet Warp. So again, look at my screen to see where I'm at. Edit menu, it's in the Puppet Warp again. It's a transform, so it's in the whole transform group. So I'm going to go ahead and say Puppet Warp for this. I actually am in Puppet Warp. You don't see the mesh because I don't have my mesh shown, but if you click on Show Mesh, you can see you've got the spider web that's on it. However, at this stage of the game, I want much, much more control than normal density will give me. So before you lay down your very first point, click on the density drop-down option and come down to say more points. This will cause my computer to take more time to do the processing, but it will give me more precise results. And then I'm going to zoom in to the ring that is on the hip that's closest to me. So the part over here that's, again, this is the ring that would be in the very front, sort of at the bottom of the image. And I'm simply going to grab, I'm going to set one point right in the middle of all of that sort of like bunched up fabric that is supposed to be around that ring. And with just one single point here, I'm going to drag this whole thing down so that it actually lines up with that and looks like it's in the right spot here for it to be, so that the fabric lines up with the area that's actually going around the ring. So this part is actually done well. However, if we go take a look at the other side, you can see where the other ring fabric is supposed to be, where this is whole like sewn up part. It is not matching the other part at all. But that's the advantage of doing this in Puppet Warp. We are now going to warp this thing so that the new suit that we're trying to add fits the old one. So I'm going to go over to the other side. I'm not worrying about anything else right now. I will get to positioning her crotch and her boobs and all that kind of stuff later. But at this stage of the game, I'm just establishing kind of this baseline. So I'm going to click on this. Take a look at my screen, what I'm talking about right here. I'm going to click on this little area right here because you can see it's exactly matched on the original suit. So I'm going to click on this area to set another point, and I'm just going to drag it so it lines up with the other suit. and then you can see we are already getting into warping this right now. So I am now going to continue to work my way up this suit. You'll see that there's another stitch that's happening right up here, sort of as I'm going to the left. There's another stitch that's sort of like finishes off that area that is going or looping around that ring, and I can see where the exact mate of that is existing over there. So I'm simply going to click and I'm going to drag this so that it actually comes into place. Now it's hard to see, but there's actually now a dip between these 2 points. So I'm going to click and put a third point in here so that I can actually straighten out that entire line. So now I've got this line is completely straightened out, and I'm feeling good about that. I'm going to now zip back out and see what it is we've really got going here. And so I've got the 2 points anchored on her hips, so that part's working pretty good. However, I'm going to now do a much larger shift in all of this. I'm going to do it right at her bust point here, so I'm coming up onto what would be her boob on her left side, our right side. I'm going to click right in the center of that, and I'm going to drag this up till it matches the other. Now, I'm not using this to rebuild the top, but it will help me get the suit to lay along the whole rest of her stomach correctly. And then I'm going to zip into this side over here. I'm going to click and go right underneath her boob so that that part actually lines up. I'm going to go back up to the top and actually set that back in a little bit better. And then we simply need to look to see where the suit is laying across on the original suit. So I'm going to pull down and just sort of like check it out to see where I am. And I can see here, I'm just adding points to make sure that this thing is lining up. Again, what I'm trying to do is to get my edge of the new suit to actually perfectly match the edge of the original suit. And so I'm going to kick this back out a little bit more. You don't have to have this completely perfect because, again, this is a smart object. All of these points and what we've done to them will be remembered on this. So I'm just dragging out the edge of the new suit so that it covers the edge of the old suit. Once we mask this, if it's actually off, we can simply go back in and adjust these to, it'll be extremely close, but we can go back in and adjust them. So it looks to me like I've got my whole edge that's at the very top of my image actually mapped in. So then I'm just going to continue to work my way around this. I'm going to go after that point at her crotch right now and just actually, I'm going to probably put it in so that it goes a little past where it should, because once I put a layer mask on here, it will trim the suit off and it will work perfect for me. So then I'm just going to start doing the exact same thing that I was doing before. I'm just clicking on points along the edge of that suit, along the seam, so that I'm actually can fit this to cover the old suit. And that part looks pretty good to me. I've got new, so I'm going now to the area of her crotch on the other side, so the part that's closest to the bottom of the image. And again, I'm just going to continue to work my way around there. Anytime that you get to sort of like a weird divot-y point in there. So again, when we're pulling points down, a lot of times you'll get a scoop in between 2 points. You simply need to put another point in there to actually pull this down. And then I'm going to work my way up the other part of the suit as well. So now I'm on the whole lower side, and I'm just going to click and put down another point and pull this suit down. And then another point in the middle to pull it down, something here in the middle to actually give that better shape. And then once you get up near the water at the other edge of it all, you can pretty much stop right there, because this is when another image is going to have to take over for this. So I'm going to zip back out and see how this looks. So you can see I've now remapped this newer suit to the older suit. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the check mark to say okay to that. And now we need to find out exactly how well this whole thing works. So I'm going to put a black layer mask on this. Again, I need to hide the new suit completely right now so that I can see where I need to actually, I'm going to hand paint my mask on this one. I'm not going to use the quick selection tool on this, because what I'm going to go for is to try to get the seams to actually match up. You'll see what I mean in just a second. So I'm going to hover over this new suit layer. I'm going to hold down the Option key. I'm going to click Add Layer Mask. It puts on a black layer mask. Then I'm going to go to my tablet and a brush, the B key. In your B key, you want to make sure that your brush is actually pretty hard, not 100% hardness, but I'm going to go to sort of like the low 80s. It's typically where I go for this kind of work. Make sure that your opacity and your flow are both at 100%, and your blending mode is also at 100%. Then you need to make sure that white is your foreground color, because we are going to paint with white on this so that we can actually reveal the new suit. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to start on the edge right where I did on that back hip. That's where I'm going to actually start this. I'm going to make my brush smaller on this, but the thing that you need to realize that I want to do here is that the suit, the original suit, the suit that I'm trying to fix, is completely wrinkled, but none of the seams are wrinkled. Look at the seam. This is the old suit that we're looking at here. There's no wrinkles in this at all. All the wrinkling is in the fabric that's inside the stitching of these seams. So I'm going to try to keep the original stitching so that I don't need to worry about all the shit that I did with puppet warping and making those seams look really weird. So to do this, again, with white as your foreground color, we are going to paint right inside the stitching. You don't want to cover the stitching. You want to simply paint right inside of it. So I'm going to start down here, and I'm just going to work my way inside the stitching. And then I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to stay inside the stitching. And you can see, everybody look up at my screen here really quickly. You can see I got close with the new stitching. This is the new stitching. This is the new suit that's being revealed right here. And the stitching, I didn't drag the suit far enough to the outside. So I'm getting a second set of the stitching right here. So to fix this, uncheck the link between your mask and your figure here, because what I want to do is I want to move the figure without moving the mask. So the mask is going to stay where it is. I'm going to click on the suit, on the pixel layer part of the suit, and I'm going to go right back into Puppet Warp. So up to the Edit menu, down to Puppet Warp, and you'll see I've got points that are running along here. I'm going to click and add another point right in the middle and pull this out so that the new suit is, so that the seam of the new suit is further to the outside of the edge, so that it doesn't interfere, or it doesn't actually show up on the inside, so that it actually is making my new suit fit the old suit. So that part actually works. I'm going to go ahead and click on the check mark to do that and say okay. And then again, back to my layer mask with a brush, and I'm just going to continue to work this line down, trying to keep the stitching of the original. And again, I've got that very same problem that's happening right down in here now. So back up into Puppet Warp. Anytime. Oh, click on the layer mask. Actually, this is trying to puppet, this is funny, this is trying to Puppet Warp my mask right now. So I'm going to hit no to that. Make sure that you select the image and then up to Puppet Warp. And again, I've got small little points right here, and I'm simply going to pick on those points here to push this further to the outside so that I only have one seam line there and not both of them. So this is basically where I'm going to go with all of this. And again, I'm not going to spend forever doing this, but now if I take a brush, the B key, go back to my layer mask, go ahead and say okay to this. Go back to my layer mask, make my brush a little bit larger, And you can see I can actually start painting along my entire suit right now to clean all of this up. So I'm not going to be as exact and perfect about it as I was before, but you guys will get the idea. And I'm going to just stay along to get the other seam right there. And this edge right here. So we're just going to finish this base layer down here at the very bottom. You'll just sort of see what it is I've ultimately got here. Make my brush larger to get a bigger area in here. So then I'm going to zip in here. There's an area here where I overpainted. You can see it's this little edge right here. I screwed this up. So simply hit the X key to make your brush, the foreground color black, and you can clean that edge up. And you can clean this edge up. And so this is basically where I'm at right now. If you take a look at my screen, I'm going to turn this guy on and off. And you can see I've gotten rid of tons of wrinkles here without doing anything. Well, not anything, but quite a bit. But does that make sense what's going on here? Is this working for you guys? Are we good on this part? Okay, so you would ultimately want to, I'm going to hold down my Option key and just click on this. You'll see that there's holes that are now in this. So again, I'm working on my layer mask. X key to go back to white is my foreground color. I'm going to fill in all of these hole parts that are actually in here. This is another hole that's right here. So it's basically a new suit here. This part's actually worked out pretty good. So at this stage of the game, I would do the same thing again. I would do another image that would actually take care of the top of this. And once those are all together, then I would do a merge stamp version of this in order to fix the rest of this, to actually get rid of the other little baby wrinkles that are actually happening in here. I'm not going to take the time to do that, but I am going to show you how to split this really quickly. So once we've got all of this done, make sure that you have your very topmost layer is actually active, and then hold down Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. It will make a merge stamp version of this. So now I've got a version of this that it actually merged the new suit with the old suit, and that's what I've got going up here at the top. At this stage of the game, we are going to, this is going to be my new version, so I'm just going to rename it NV. And I'm going to then split this. Make 2 copies of this, Command J, Command J. Grab the one that's in the middle, the NV copy, and I'm going to call it low. Double click on the other one, and I'm going to call it high. Turn off high so that you can't see it. Select low so that we can actually blur it. And then I'm going to zoom in here. I'm looking for all the texture in this, but I'm also looking at the texture of her skin, because again, sometimes you've got texture of a suit that you don't really, you feel like, yeah, well, I've blurred that completely, but you're still carrying too much texture in your low layer. So you really want to make sure that you hit this hard enough that you don't have any skin texture or any suit texture at all. So with the low layer selected, up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And I'm gonna start off with 1. It's not enough. I can still see all the pores of the skin. Delete key, hit 2. It's better. I can still see all the goosebumps on her skin. Go to 3. I can still see them. 4. I'm just beginning to get rid of them. 5. 5 is pretty solid. I've actually gotten rid of all of the goosebumps. I've gotten rid of all the texture of the suit. All of that's working well for me, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Then select my high layer, turn its eyeball on, and we need to do the split now. So up to the image menu, down to Apply Image. Where are you? Apply Image. In the drop-down menu at the very top of your Apply Image for Layer, click on the drop-down menu, and you want to come down to Low. Then in the blending mode, you want to drop that menu from multiply all the way down to subtract. In the subtract, you want to leave your opacity at 100%, the scale at 2, and the offset of 128. and say OK to that. So then to make our safety layers on this, I'm going to click on, I'm on the high layer right now. I'm going to hit Command J to actually change that. High copy is going to stay at a normal blending mode, but when I go down to high, I'm going to change its blending mode to linear light. And then finally, I'm going to hover between high copy and high, hold down the Option key to get that little change in cursor that'll allow me to clip high copy down to high. So this part is now set correctly. And then finally, I'm going to click on low and simply hit Command J to make a copy of it. And I don't need to change blending modes there at all. Then these 4 layers that represent all my split work, the low, low copy, high, and high copy, I'm going to select all of them. So I'm going to click on low, the one that's on the very bottom, scroll up to the top, hold down my Shift key, and click on high copy. And you can see all 4 of these are now highlighted. Then I'm going to go to the flyout menu that's to the right of the tab that says layer. Click on that, and in the flyout menu, go up to the top and say, I want to do a new group from these layers. Do you have all 4 of these selected? Then click on the flyout menu that's over to the right-hand side. Come up to New Copy from Layers, and then just call the new group FS. I do it typically in capitals. It's just short for frequency separation. That puts everybody into this group, and then you want to turn the eyeball on and off. And if you see a change, you did something wrong. If you don't, this is always the check. If you don't see a change, then you're actually good to go. So then finally, I'm going to open up the FS group, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to take a look at the wrinkles that are still remaining. And again, this is not a texture thing. This is a tonal thing. So to do this work, I'm going to work only on my low copy. Remember, low is all about color and tone. High is all about texture and detail. So that's the difference. These are shadows and highlights that are down here. That is all color and luminosity and tone. That is not texture or detail at all. To actually see what I really mean by that, hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball for low copy. It will turn everybody else back off. And then you can, it's easier to spot the work that you actually need to do. So I'm going to go after these 2 wrinkles that are right down here at the very beginning. The easiest way for me to actually fix these things is to use the mixer brush. So if you come over to your tool palette that's on the right-hand side, and guys, as soon as we get through this, we're going to take a break. So anyway, the tool palette on the left-hand side, come down to the brush palette, click on it, and then at the very bottom you'll see mixer brush. So again, look up at my screen to see where I'm at. I'm going to actually set this up to use the mixer brush. So again, the brush palette, click on it, you'll get the flyout menu, come all the way down to the bottom, click on mixer brush. Then up at the top, the way we set up our mixer brush, the mixer brush, the very first part of the options work just like a regular brush does. Click on the drop-down menu and you can see we have hardness and size. I'm going to leave this brush as a completely soft brush, so 0% hardness. Again, I don't need to worry about mixing texture here. This is all about just mixing tone. Then you can skip the little icon that looks like a file folder with a brush in the middle of it and go to the next one. Your next one is a preview of the color that your brush is actually going to pick up. In our case, you want to make sure that it's actually the checkerboard, because what I'm looking to do, the thing about the mixer brush to set it up correctly to do this frequency separation work is that you essentially want the brush to clean itself before every single stroke. So right now I have no color on this brush. It is a completely clean brush. When I actually use the brush and I'm going to put the brush down and drag it, it will load the brush, but then the minute I lift my stylus off of my tablet, it will clean itself again. Now, if you don't see yours as a checkerboard, you need to look at the 2 icons that are right next to it. You need to make sure that the one that's in the middle between the preview of your color and actually the other two controls for your brush, you want to make sure that it is not pressed in. So look up at my screen to see what I'm talking about right now. This one, if I press this one in, you can see it actually loads color. It's actually loading my foreground color. If I uncheck this though, it goes to that transparency. That's what you need to make sure you want. However, the second of the icons, the one that's furthest to the right, you definitely want it actually pressed in. So again, you'll see a little dark highlight around it. So again, you should have a preview of color, should be checkerboard. Then the next icon that's in the middle should not be pressed in. And then finally, the one that's on the right, that's right next to the word that says custom, should be pressed in. Has everybody got that working? Again, the check on this always is that preview for the color that's being loaded should be checkerboard. So then in terms of the wetness, put that at 20%. The load, we're going to put that at 100%. The mix is at 100%. And then your flow will go anywhere from 20 to 40% usually. If you're having to do really hardcore heavy work, you can actually get your flow up even higher. It's just how fast this is all going to happen. So I'm going to leave my flow at almost 40%. Mine's at 39, close enough. Then I'm going to come down onto my screen. I'm going to make my brush smaller. And then this is the trick. What you're trying to do is you're trying to set your brush down in an area that has good color, and you are going to drag it across the areas that have bad color that you're trying to fix. So look up at my screen right here. I'm going to start on the top of this because I have a highlight right here on this wrinkle and a shadow. I want to kill them both in one fell swoop. So I'm going to start at the very top, and I'm simply going to click and drag across them both. And that actually got rid, in that entire stroke, got rid of the highlight and the shadow. And I'm simply going to do the same for all the rest. So I'm simply clicking and dragging down. Now in this case, I've still got a little bit of a highlight that's happening right here, so I'm going to simply hit it again. And then I've got a little bit of shadow on the bottom part, but underneath the shadow, I've got a little bit of highlight. So I'm going to click then and drag up. And you can see it's pretty much mitigated this shadow. So I'm going to do the same thing for the other wrinkle that's up at the very top. I'm just going to click and work my way down, and then click on the bottom and work my way up again. Then I'm going to take a look at some of the other problems that I've got over here. You can see that there are these shadow lines that are running down, sort of like, they're not wrinkles, they're actually highlights that are on this fabric that I need to fix. And I also need to soften this edge. So everybody look at my screen right here. I'm going to turn on my high copy again. It's this transition area right in here. I'm never going to completely get rid of it, but I can certainly soften it up. So I'm going to turn off my high and low color right here. Again, still working with my mixer brush. It's the beautiful thing about the mixer brush. You don't ever have to actually have to pick a color or reload it. So I'm going to start working on my highlight up in here, and I'm going to drag across this. But then I'm also going to grab my highlight color and push it back. I'm going to go to a little bit bigger brush so that it's a little bit softer here in doing this transition work. But again, I'm just trying to soften those edges. There's a really dark line that's running right down the middle of it, sort of like her stomach line here. I want to get rid of all of that. So again, mixer brush will take care of a lot of that. However, if you get in a situation where the mixer brush is not working, I'm going to show you another trick. So this line that I'm talking about that's going right down the middle, you guys see that dark line that I'm talking about? It's this area. Again, I'll turn on my high colors. It's this area that's right here, this dark shadow line that's right in here. We can do this now still. We can do this with our highlight turned on so you can actually see what it is I'm talking about. So I'm still working on my low copy right here. I'm going to go to a regular brush. So again, over to your tool palette, click on this, come back to a regular brush. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so it's roughly about the size of this. I'm going to drop the flow of my regular brush down to like a 1 or a 2%. And then what you want to do is, again, take a look at my screen where I'm talking about this dark line that's right in here. I want it to be the same color as the area that's on either side of it. So to get the color that's on either side of it, simply hold down your Option key and click on the lighter color that's to either side of this, and then just start scrubbing your way along this line where that dark shadow is. And you can see it's actually lifting it because it's making the color that was right next to it. So then I'm going to continue to work my way up on that, and that does a pretty good job of it. I'm going to continue to work my way down here and do the same thing down in here. And that part's actually fixed that pretty well. But I feel like I've still got a hard line that's happening right along part of this edge. So I'm simply going to go back to my mixer brush. And again, it's already set up. I don't need to change anything. And I'm just going to start to drag along this line right here to smooth all of this part out. Then looking at the original wrinkles that I actually got rid of, you can see that if you hold down the Option key and click on our low copy, that part's been pretty smoothed out. Again, I can actually hit it a little bit more with a mixer brush to make sure that that's covered pretty well. But the thing that you'll notice, so again, I'm coming up and down on it. I'm hitting it from every single direction just because I'm trying to mix that color. But if we turn on high copy, you'll actually see that it looks like these shadow lines are still left. What that means is that these lines, this, which is still color, actually in my split got put up into my high layer. So to see what I mean by that, hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball for the high layer, and you can actually see it. This is now the high layer. This is supposed to be only texture and tone, but you can see there's tone in here. So this is a consequence of the split. Again, when you're doing this splitting work, the challenge is to try to only have texture in the high layer and only have color and tone in the low layer. But that's never a perfect thing. So some of the color, this shadow, this part shadow, has actually creeped up into my high layer, but there's no reason I can't fix that. It's easy to fix that part. So again, I'm going to hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. I'm going to select high copy so that I'm working on high copy. And with my clone stamp tool, again, if you take a look at how I do my clone stamp tool, it should have a relatively high hardness on here. So I typically do mine in the 80s because, again, I don't want my edges to mix old texture with new. I'm going to then simply come over this area where I've got texture that's the same color that I want. Hold down the Option key, click to set my sample point, and then simply drag across that line to actually replace that texture and shadow. There's another one that's right above it, so I'm going to actually sample here and do the same thing. And now when I turn my low copy back on, you can see that I've actually removed all of those wrinkles and all of my texture is still there. So if you scroll down to the very bottom and turn on the original 059 that we started with, the very, very base layer, turn its eyeball on, and then hold down the Option key and click on that eyeball, it will turn everybody else on and off. And you can see that this is a much more effective beginning way of trying to clean out all the wrinkles in the suit than just attacking this with a healing brush tool or a clone stamp tool from the get-go. Questions about this? I'll show you because I can go back to it before I actually fixed it. So what? No, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. So you can see, even though I've gotten rid of these two wrinkle lines right here, I'm going to turn off my low copy, you'll see it again. I've gotten rid of those two for the most part, but there's still a small shadow left in this. Okay, so right, so what you need for the top one, this is what happens here, because this is the challenging part. So this high layer right here is set to linear light. That's what you want. If you have the second one that's also set to linear light, you get a double hit of contrast. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. Look how crunchy this thing is. So it's getting hit twice. It's being hit by linear light two times. You don't want that to happen. You only want it to be hit by once. So if you change the blending mode of the top one back to normal, nothing of it changes. But when you clip anything, it inherits the blending mode of what you've clipped it to. So instead of hitting this, I'm going to leave it at normal. Instead of hitting it twice, if you clip it, it actually inherits the linear light blending mode Because if you hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball for this high copy, you can see it's basically a black and white image. So it has to have that linear light blending mode, or it won't look like the original image. So, but again, because I've got it clipped, this high layer is actually set to linear light, and because this normal is clipped, it inherits the linear light. So in effect, it is linear light, but it's not setting it to linear light, which would double the impact. Always work on the top one, on the upper one. So that actually brings up a good point here. I need to show you guys how to recover if you screw something up. So the whole reason that we've actually done this whole copying part is so that we've got a reference that we can actually use to go back if we have to. So we're going to actually bring these big humps back. So to do that, come down to your low layer, not the low copy. Remember, I have done nothing to the low. I've only worked on the low copy. I've done nothing to the high. I've only worked on the high copy. So the low layer and the high layer both are essentially virgins. They haven't had anything done to them, and I would never do anything to them. So instead, let's say an art director comes to you and for whatever reason says, I need those 2 wrinkles back. And you're like, okay. So come down to your low copy, which is the virgin. Grab your lasso tool, the L key, and just do a big circle right around her stomach area, right around where you know that those 2 things actually are. Command J to jump those to their own layer. So this is now the original content. Drag this on top of your low copy layer. It brings them back, and then Command E merges it down. And now I have restored that work to my to my low copy layer, and then I can just keep going on. Does that make sense? Did that work for everyone? Yeah. So I'm going to go back. So I've gotten rid of most of those things right here, right? But again, for some reason, somebody wants them back. Right? So I'm going to go to my low layer, not the low copy. The low copy is where I removed it all. Again, if you turn off low copy, you can see they're right there. So instead, I'm going to go to my low one, hit the L key to get the lasso tool, and just make a selection of this. Jump it to its own layer, Command J. So this layer, that I've got right here, has the original bumps in it, right? So if I drag this on top of low copy, they come back. And then I just want it to be a part. Again, I don't want 1,000 layers in here. I want it to be a part of my low copy. So Command E will merge it down into low copy. And so now it's back. And then I would retouch again. Make sense? Okay, you can close that up. I'm going to call this 3 o'clock, guys. Let's make it a hard 10. If you could be back at 3:10, we will jump into doing compositing. To it. Okay. So in Photoshop, when I take a look at this, what is your first evaluation when you're actually looking at this guy? When you look at it, go ahead. The lighting's off. What's wrong with it? Yeah, you can actually spot, there's actually lights in the image. You can spot them from the very top. The lighting in all of this, if you take a look at it, take a look at the chairs. The lighting is directly top down, right? However, the girl is not top down. The girl is actually side lit, correct? So it's the wrong girl. The reason I give you those 2 different girls is that one of them is top lit and one of them is side lit. So this is actually the wrong girl in here. However, I want you to take a look at some other things in here really fast. If you take a look at this girl, zoom into her really quickly before we get rid of her. Does anything seem odd about her? It's probably just because I know this image so well. But go ahead and select the composite body. Grab that one, select composite body, and then just do Command T to do a transform. It's going to say we're going to have to turn off the smart filters. That's fine. Go ahead and turn them off. And then look up at your options bar and tell me what's wrong. She has been distorted. So in doing the work, Christiana, when she was actually rescaling her, did not have the width and the length connected. So you can see that her height is 75.87%, but her width is even narrower. It's 69 point. Now, Christiana, you may have done that deliberately. I'm not saying that that was a mistake, but I'm merely just saying that that would be off. So if you click on the link between the width and height, you'll actually see it readjusts her so that she is now proportionately the same. None of which really matters because it's the wrong girl. So let's go ahead and get rid of her. I'm going to take a look at everything else that we've got up here so you can see there's a series of check layers that are on here. That's fine. There's a series of adjustment layers that are also on here. That's fine, but none of them mean anything to us anymore because it's the wrong girl. So I'm going to click on the shadows, which is the layer that's right above the cinema background. I'm going to scroll all the way to the very top, hold down the Shift key, and click on the Color Check Layers folder. It selects everything except for the background layer, and I'm going to hit the Delete key to get rid of it because she's no longer going to be our figure. I'm going to double click on the hand and zip back out. Now this is something that a lot of you guys are not doing, and you need to think about this. So in the two figures that I gave you, those were both color balanced to neutral and both had perfect exposure. So in order to integrate correctly with a background, I need the same for my backgrounds, or at least as close as I can get it. Remember, what we're trying to do in this game is that we're trying to put a background element and a figure element together. And the closer that I can get them to a norm and then put them together, the easier it will be to work with them. That doesn't mean that I can't then turn around and once I get the composite complete, that then I can turn around and I can make my image much warmer or much colder or much more contrasty or much more underexposed or much more overexposed. Or I mean, it can do all of those things, but you do not want to start out with one image that is in some weird ass color space, really warm, really whatever, and then an image of the figure that's really, really super cold, and then try to put the two together and then try to change the one figure that's super cold to match the one that's super. It's just easier to get them both to a normal state and then put them together and then warm everything up or cool everything down. Does that make sense? Okay, so my first move in all of this is to simply check the exposure part of all. So if you'll see that it is a smart object. If you double click on this smart object, it'll open up and you can see it's not a raw file smart object. What this is a file that was basically been baked. It's been whatever the color is, and that part doesn't really matter to me. It's not, there's no downside to this, but it's not the raw data. So you can close up the second window that opened up about this. Instead, we need to treat this as a faux raw file. To do that, because I don't have the raw data in here, come up to your filter menu, down to camera raw filter. This works as a smart filter and it emulates being a raw file in camera raw. Does that make sense, everyone? Now, this is important because I can, unlike what I can do in Photoshop, I can white balance in here. I also, unlike in Photoshop, a lot of you guys are changing exposure using curves. That doesn't work the same as doing this here. If you actually take a curve to make something lighter or darker, it doesn't treat the entire tonal range equally. So for instance, if you take a curve and you grab it in the middle and you crank it up, it makes the midtones lighter, but the shadows and the highlights are still going to be pinned to their corners, their respective corners. So it's not an even thing. However, if you run the camera raw filter and come in and grab exposure and drag it up, then it lifts everything in the image up equally. So your highlights will get brighter, your midtones will get brighter, and your shadows will also get brighter equally. So it's a much more effective way of dealing with exposure. Now, in the couple of examples that we've done before, when I actually go in, like the really extreme color correction we did of the girl who was on the railroad tracks and we put her into the Italian street at night, you remember that part? In that case, I didn't want an even exposure shift. What I wanted to do was simply bring the highlights down. Her face was too bright to be in that scene, but I didn't want to bring everything down because that would have then turned around and made the midtones and the shadows too dark to actually work in that scene. So there are times where you really prefer to use curves to do this work, but in general, this really happens in doing coming into camera raw and doing it via exposure. So anyway, we're going to look at all of this. But so my first move on this is to find out if this thing has been white balanced. To do that, open up the color panel that's in your camera raw filter, click on the white balance adjustment tool, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just take a look around at the possible things that should be white balance. I'm guessing that the billboard or the marquee part that says cinema should be white balance. So I'm going to simply click on an area. I'm going to stay away from the edges where you get a lot of that red spilling in from the sides. That's not what I want. I'm going to actually try it right here in the very middle. So right between sort of like the E and the M, I'm simply going to click on that. And it actually brings a sort of a kind of a nasty cyan blue in there to me. That's the way it looks. It looks like old school fluorescent lighting, and I don't really like that part, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. But I know that this is close enough. You could also try, I don't know what those little three squares are that are in the center of the image. If we zip into there, we're going to try again. I'm going to click on the white balance tool to see the white balance tool to see if that shifts things considerably. So I'm going to click on the thing back there, and that actually puts in a little bit of warmth, and I kind of like that part. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this part. But the other thing that nobody in this room is doing is actually checking their exposures on this. So not that Photoshop always gets it right, but I want to know what Photoshop thinks the proper exposure of this should be. So to do that, if you look up right underneath your histogram where it says Edit, there's an Auto button. Click on your Auto button and see what happens. And in this case, it brightens everything up. And I know that this is now getting it much closer to normal, which is how I've already shot the two figures that are in the studio. So if I want this thing to be dark and moody, that's fine. But for me to try to go in and match this girl, to get her to actually match a background that is, in some cases, well, if we take a look at the light, we'll see how much it actually opened it up. This actually added a 1.25 to this. So how on earth am I ever going to match a girl that is normal exposure in a background that's a 1.25 under? It'll never happen. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this part right now. Then I'm going to go get the correct girl. If you guys go look in your session number 9 for this class, that's where both of the girls are. Again, it was for your assignment. So into retouching, go to session 9. In your assignment folder, that's where the two girls are. I'm going to grab the other girl, the girl in black, and I'm simply going to double click on that. She will open up into her own window. Again, I do not use tab behavior. That's why my images are separate. If you guys if you get frustrated eventually by tearing these tabs repeatedly off and off and off and off and off, simply come up to Photoshop, down to your preferences or settings if you're using the newest version of Mac OS, and then come down to, I'm going to try interface. Not interface, workspace. Yeah, in workspace, you want to uncheck open documents as tabs, and you want to uncheck enable floating document window docking. If you do that, then when you bring in multiple images, it doesn't matter. They will all come in as separate images without this tab behavior, so that you can really understand how to navigate from one to the other. So I'm going to drag this figure onto this cinema background. So again, you simply click on the layer that is the body, drag it on top of the image that you want to bring it into. I always hold down the shift key. What the shift key does is it's not going to bring it in. What it does is it brings it in perfectly centered. So if your images are identical, then it will bring them in and register. But if they're not, it will bring your figure in perfectly in the middle. So hold down the shift key and let go. You can see it's gigantic girl. That's okay because she is a smart object already, so I can transform her immediately. So I'm going to scale her down to get her roughly the size that I think she should be. So Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the link between width and height. And then I'm going to just hover over either the H for height or the W for width. It doesn't matter which one. Your cursor will turn into the scrubby slider, and you can click and drag to the left. Will make her smaller. You'll see that both the width and the height are actually doing that. And I'm going to get her small enough. Again, I've cranked mine down to about 39 and 33%. It doesn't matter. We've got to fine tune this in a second anyway. I'm going to go ahead and click on the check mark to actually put this in. And then I need to scale her. I need to actually scale her correctly. So how do I get this girl scaled properly for this scene? What would you do? The chair is a possibility, but I'm going to go with table height is a better possibility. It's a more standard known. Again, I'm not really, if you take a look at the chair right here, this chair's got a much higher back that I'm sitting in than that chair that's right there. So it's not so, but table height is a real good standard, right? So I'm going to zoom over. I'm going to come into my image where I can sort of see the table. You can sort of see the base and you can sort of see the top. So with your rulers showing, if your rulers are not showing, you need to get them to show because I need guidelines for this. So to get your rulers to show, come up to your view menu and come down and make sure that there's a check mark right next to your rulers. They should be showing now. I'm going to go to the ruler that's on the very top. I'm going to click on the ruler and simply drag down, and it will pull a guideline down. And what I'm trying to do is find the foot of the base of that table. So I'm going to stick it right down here. I'm going to then do another guideline. I'm going to click and pull down and let it sit right on the very top of the table. And I'm doing the middle of the base to the middle of the top. Again, this doesn't work exactly the way it would work in a three-dimensional world, but it'll be close enough for us to actually get this part to work here. So then I've got my pad of paper that's next to me. I need to measure how tall this table is. So I'm going to come over to my tool palette on the left-hand side. The tool that has the eyedropper on it, if you click on that, you'll get a flyout menu. There's other tools that are in here, and one of them is the ruler tool. You want to go ahead and select the ruler tool. And then before we actually do measurements here, you need to, I'm just telling you this to make your life easier. If you set your ruler to give you a readout in pixels, then you will get your ruler measurement thing that we're actually going to use. The tool will also measure in whatever the increments that your rulers on the edge of your image are in. So if you hover over the ruler, that's the border at the very top or on the left-hand side, it doesn't matter which one you do, hover actually over the ruler, hold down your control key and click, you will get a drop-down menu. You can do this with a right button mouse or a two-finger swipe on a trackpad on a Mac. Come down and just make sure that pixels is what you have picked. It's easier for us to stay in pixels and to do our translation of height to inches than it is if you start getting into doing centimeters to inches or inches to feet or that kind. It just gets more confusing. So just stay with pixels. It's the easiest thing to do. Come over then your two guidelines, and it doesn't matter whether you click on the top one or the bottom one. I'm going to just hover over the top one. You need to be close, but not exact. If you're really close, Macintosh will, Photoshop will actually snap your ruler starting point to this guideline. So simply click on the top guideline, start to drag down, add the shift key to this, because adding the shift key will actually make your ruler only go perfectly up and down. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to come down till it snaps to the ruler on the bottom and let go. And then you will see over in your info palette that there is a height that is the readout of this ruler. And so the table height of this ruler is 168 pixels. I'm going to write that down. 168 px. So that's going to be the height of my table. Now I need to translate that to inches. To do that, I'm going to go out to my website. So please do this with me. I want everybody, every step that I do, if you can do it with me, please do it with me. If you get lost, please stop me. I want you guys to get through this part because this is going to be our last chance to really dive deep into doing composite work. And I want to make sure that I'm giving you all the tricks that I can possibly give to you to actually figure this part out. So in my browser, I'm going to do height of a cafe table, height of a cafe table, HEI. And say okay to that. And it says between 28 and 30 inches. Well, that's close enough for me. I'm just going to do 30 inches on here. So that is the height of my cafe table. So then I'm going to go back into Photoshop. You don't need to do this. You just need to watch this on my screen. I'm going to go through cross multiplying again. Don't let that freak you out. Don't let the term freak you out. It works the same every single time. So I'm going to hide everybody else. I'm going to do a brand new file. You guys don't need to do this. I'm just going to, I want to be able to show you how the math works. So I'm going to do a 10 by 8 by 300. And I'm going to say okay to this. So I'm going to turn on my tablet. So this is how you figure out how tall the girl should be in pixels. So we're going to start out with our 168 pixels. That's how tall the cafe table is. So I'm going to go to my regular brush, make it a hard brush, 100% opaquity, 100% flow, dekey to default my foreground. So I'm going to do 168 pixels. So 168 pixels. And I'm going to draw a line underneath this, and then I'm going to do another line over here. So this 168 pixels, you want it directly across from the number of inches that you are talking about. So this 168 was how tall the table was. We just looked up how tall the table should be in inches, and it's 30 inches. Then pixels go on one side, inches go on the other. I have 3 variables that I know. I'm trying to figure out the 4th that I don't know. I also know how tall the girl is. She's 5'10", but she's wearing heels, so I'm going to say 6 feet tall. That's 72 inches. So 72 goes here, inches. And so what I don't know is how tall the girl should be in pixels. Does this make sense to everybody, what's going on here? So they talk about doing cross multiplication, and the reason they say cross multiply is that out of all of these, there's only 2 numbers that I can cross to multiply. It's this 168 times the 72. I can't do 30 times what I don't know, right? So this gives you the key. So cross multiplying, what you do is you do the cross multiplication, 168 times 72, and then you divide that number by the 3rd variable that you do know, and the result is the one that you are missing. So in this case, it's going to be 168 times 72 equals, can somebody do 172 times So do 168 times 72. 1, 2, what? 0, 9. That's it? Okay. So, I'm sorry? Oh, 96? Okay, so 12,096? Okay, fine. So then you take 12,096 and you divide it by your 3rd variable, which is this 30 up here. So can you divide that number by 30 and tell me what that equals? I'm sorry, 4 what? I'm just going to do 403. So what that tells me is that this value right here should be 403. The girl should be 403 pixels tall. Does this make sense to everyone, what we just did? Okay, we can close. I'm just going to get rid of it for a second. So then I'm going to go back to my ruler again. So the ruler tool that's on the same place as the eyedropper tool. I'm going to now start at the bottom and work my way up. So I'm going to click on the bottom and I'm going to start to pull up, again, holding down the shift key so it restricts it to be solid. And then you'll notice that I'm getting a negative number. That's only because of the direction that I'm pulling this in. So again, I'm looking at the height in my info palette, and I want to just bring this up until I get, what was it, 406? No, 403, right? Is that what it was, 403? It doesn't need to be exact. So I'm going to do a 403 here and let go. Then I'm going to drag another guideline down, and it will actually snap to that tool, to that top part. So these two lines now are how tall the girl should actually be in scale. So I'm going to move the girl. Again, I'm going to select the top composite layer, hit the V key to move the girl. I'm going to bring her feet down so that her feet touch the bottom line. And she's actually relatively close to the size that she should be for this. She needs to be a little bit taller though, so I'm going to make her a little bit taller. So again, with the composite girl selected, Command T to bring up the transfer dialog box. Now, if I simply start to transform her now, the anchor point is right where her crotch is. That means she is going to grow larger all the way around. Her head will get taller, but her feet will also get longer. So her feet will move to the bottom of the image, her head will move to the top of the image, and then the right side and the left side will also zoom out. I don't want to do that because her feet are where they need to be right now. So I'm simply going to put the anchor point down at her foot. And then I'm going to click on the link between the width and the height, and then I'm simply going to drag this up until her head actually gets as tall as the top. Now when I do that, you need to recheck to make sure that your width and height percentages stayed the same. Mine did. So now this girl is scaled correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the check mark and say, looks good to me. Then I don't need these guidelines anymore. She is scaled correctly in the right space, so I can get rid of these guidelines. To get rid of them, come up to your view menu, down to guides, down to clear guides, or over to clear guides, and get rid of them. So she is now scaled correctly in this space. And again, I've got other things that I need to go in and tackle this part right now. So at this stage of the game, I'm actually going to run my check layers action on this. So over to my actions palette. Everybody still have their check layers action? Does anybody not? All right, so under actions, I'm going to scroll down and find my check layer action. You don't have yours again? So is the check layer set still sitting on your desktop? So go to our server. In class projects, inside Engelhard, inside of resources, there's a thing in there that's called check layers set.atn. Drag that to your desktop. You good? Then back in Photoshop, go to your actions palette. The little menu that's to the right of your actions palette, click on that drop down menu and come down to load actions, and then navigate to your desktop where that file is you just did, and click on it and then say OK. It will then load your check layer action set into your actions palette, and then simply click the parent, the topmost folder, and then click on the little the little arrow at the bottom of your actions palette that's pointing to the right, and it will run your actions. So mine is run. I'm not going to start with color. Typically the way I do mine is I start with luminosity first, then I go to color, and then I do saturation. That's typically the order that I work it in. Every now and then when you do that, you have to revisit one. You'll change the saturation and realize that your luminosity is off. But anyway, this is how I do it. So I'm going to turn off the eyeball for the check layer set, and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to turn on my luminosity check layer and take a look to see what I've got. And so in this case, you can actually see that the girl is too light for the image, right? She does not fit this. And this is what I was talking about. A lot of you would actually look at this now and say, well, okay, we need to then put a curve on here and drop it. But my vote is a better move on this is to scroll down to the girl, click on this girl. Again, she is a smart object here. However, if I double click on her, she is a nested smart object. So she's in here, deeper in here. I don't want to go deeper into this to actually get to the raw data to reprocess it. So instead, I'm simply going to accept the fact that it is what it is. It's this smart object, and I'm going to run the pseudo camera raw on it, which is the filter. Up to the filter menu, down to camera raw. You'll notice, really quickly guys, here, take a look at my screen. You'll notice that I've got camera raw that's sitting up here at the very top. This will always change. Whatever filter you use will then be replaced, will replace this very top thing. However, you don't want to click on this camera raw because what it does is it will run camera raw filter, which is what you want, but it will do what your last camera raw filter was set to do. And our last camera raw filter was set to change the color temperature of the cinema background and to also open that image up a stop and a quarter. That's not what I want to do to this girl. If anything, I want to get her darker. So do not pick it here, reselect it in the order, in the place where it really is in the menu stack. Click on that. This will open her up, and again, we can't see her now in relationship to the background, so you simply have to guess at this. So I'm going to grab the exposure slider. Again, I'm going to open up the light panel, grab the exposure slider, and I'm going to knock off a full stop. And then I'm just going to say, okay. Again, this is a smart object, so if it doesn't work, I can always come back in here and do it. And now when I'm looking at this actually seems pretty good to me right here. What I'm really looking for is the color of her face relative to the shadow of the chairs and all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like this was a good move. However, if you're on the fence about it, if you think, well, yeah, okay, yeah, it kind of works, but maybe it's going to be a little bit darker, whatever, simply scroll down. Your camera raw filter is a smart filter. Double click on it. You will go right back into the pseudo camera raw. You can grab your exposure slider and take it to a stop and a half down. So I'm going to just try it again and say okay to that and see if I like this better. Do I like that better? I don't really think it's there. I think maybe it's somewhere in between the two. So I'm going to double click on the camera raw filter again, and then I'm going to adjust it till it's a -1 1/4 stops and say okay to that. And I feel better about that. That seems to actually fit the vibe of this scene. So I'm going to turn off my luminosity layer check and take a look at this. And again, we're not completely there. We actually need to do some other work to get us there, but this seems like a good beginning to me. We'll see how this ultimately goes. So my next move is to check the color. So I'm going to go up to the very top of my color check layer stack. And again, the reason that this color check layers is actually got, it's a group is because there is a color correction adjustment layer in here to basically strip out the color and then, or to strip out everything but the color. But then there's also a hue saturation layer there and to boost it so that you can really see it. Because if you turn this thing on and you actually turn off the hue saturation layer version of it, you can see it's really very subtle. This is really difficult for me to look at this and say, okay, well, I know that what do I know? I can't tell anything. But if you add that hue saturation layer to it, then I can clearly see that her skin tone is fine in this scenario, but her outfit is completely off. Her outfit is far too blue to be in this scene. The scene is dominated by red. I need to bring some of that into her, basically what she's wearing. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom now. I'm going to select the girl, the smart object, because again, all of my adjustment layers now need to be directly on top of this girl or directly on top of another adjustment layer that is already clipped to this girl. So I'm going to start out with this one. So again, the composite body 2 is selected. I'm going to add a color balance correction to this, a color balance adjustment layer. As soon as this thing comes on, you need to do two things. The first one is you need to clip it to the girl so that any adjustment that I make here is only made to the girl and not the entire scene. So hover your cursor between the adjustment layer, the color balance adjustment layer, and the girl. Hold down the Option key. You'll get that weird little icon with a square pointing down. Click on that. You will see that the adjustment layer then shifts over to the right and shows you that little arrow, which indicates that it is being clipped to the girl. And then finally, you need to change the blending mode of this from normal down to color, because all I want to change in here is color. I don't want to change luminosity or saturation. So this is now set up to go. So my first move in all of this is that I know that I've got too much blue in here. So the obvious thing to fight the blue, you have two options right here. A hardcore change in the blue would be your blue-yellow slider. A more subtle change in here is actually going to be your cyan-red slider. So I'm going to start with the blue-yellow slider that's at the bottom. I'm going to click and I'm going to start to push this to the yellow, which is getting me away from the blue. The problem with this, though, is that she becomes really yellow, and this is not really matching my background. So I'm going to double click on this to go back to 0, and instead I'm going to see what happens in my cyan red slider. So I'm going to grab the cyan red slider and I'm going to start to push it towards the red, and you can see that really pretty quickly it's starting to get rid of the blue. I've got a lot of sort of like magenta in here right now. You can see there's some magentas that are happening in this other screen. However, I'm going to push it over a little bit harder. So I've got a magenta, a red, if you guys want the same value that I've got a red of a plus 14. Then I'm going to go after this yellow-blue slider again. I'm going to grab it and start to push to the yellow again. And you can see as soon as I do that, all of a sudden everything comes together. I've got a blue now of a -8. Again, the plus and minus only have to do with the direction that you're going in. If you do your sliders to the right, they actually are positive values. If you go to the left, they're negative values. Zeros are in the very middle. So I've got now a yellow of a -8, and she is now, the color of her, everything in here is actually matching my background. Don't push these color sliders any harder than you have to push them to get your result. If you continue to push these, then all of a sudden she gets overcolored and she gets changed, whatever. So I'm going to keep this to a dull roar. I'm going to go up now to my color check layers and turn the eyeball off on them. And then I'm going to come back down to this color check layer, the color balance layer that I just did, and I'm simply going to click on and off on the eyeball. And you can see that this totally brings her in to the feeling of the red light that's actually happening in my scene right here. Make sense? All right. My next move is to check my saturation. So up to the saturation slider, the check color saturation slider. Now, there is 0 saturation in the outfit that she's wearing. It's a black outfit. There is no color saturation in that per se. Again, remember, desaturated colors are grayscale. She's basically wearing, black on black on black, right? So I'm really looking more at her hair and her face. But I'm also looking at the surround around this. And you can see that parts of the background that are much lighter are, again, in saturation check. Wherever it is lighter is more saturated, wherever it is darker is less saturated. But I'm looking at my scenario right here, and she sort of falls kind of in the middle of all of this. So she is not anywhere near as dark. I'm really sort of like looking at the tables around all of this kind of stuff. She may be a little bit too dark in here, so I'm going to try and bump the saturation just a little bit to see if I feel like that looks better. So I'm going to come down now and click on my color balance adjustment layer, because I need to add a hue saturation adjustment layer above this, but they need to be right next to each other so that so that my clipping continues throughout the entire stack. So I'm going to add a hue saturation layer on top of my color adjustment layer, the one that I just made. Hue saturation, again, immediately hover your cursor between the new hue saturation layer and the color balance adjustment layer right underneath it. Hold down your option key and click to clip that hue saturation to the girl so that the saturation slider only impacts the girl, and then change, change the blending mode of that hue saturation adjustment layer from normal down to saturation. And then I'm just going to bump it slightly. So I'm going to click on the saturation slider in the middle, and I'm just going to pop it up. And you'll see it'll only impact her face and her hair. So I've got it to like a plus 18. It seems to fit a little bit better to me. We'll find out if I really do like this. I'm going to turn off my hue saturation check layer, and then come back down and turn on my the adjustment layer, the hue saturation adjustment layer that I put on there. And I'm going to turn it on and off. And you can see that in a certain way, she does balance this scene a little bit better. It puts the red is in her face. It's a little bit stronger red in her face. Personally, I feel like it's too strong. Again, just because my check layer said this is where I should be doesn't mean that that's where I have to be. So I'm looking at this and I feel like, okay, well, I liked the way it looked before. I like this adjustment somewhat, but I feel like it's too strong. So I'm simply going to grab my saturation slider. It's at a plus 18, and I'm going to cut it in half. I'm just going to bring it down to a plus 8 or 9. And then I'm going to turn this thing on and off. And I don't feel like now that that's actually, I feel like the color is still off on this a little bit. So I'm going to push the saturation slider up. It wasn't an 18. I'm going to go up to like a 12. And that feels better to me. So this is kind of where I'm going to go at in this whole part right here. However, the last thing that I need to deal with in all of this is if the light really is coming from the top down, her whole lower part of her body would be considerably darker than it actually is in my scene right here. I'm looking at the chair and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe this is right. Maybe she is correct in this scene right here. I'm not going to struggle with this part too heavily, but I'm looking at my scene right here, and I feel like that the chair and the table and all of this kind of stuff is actually lighter. So this is making me rethink, did I do this correctly for the exposure adjustment that I put on here? And I think it's too strong. So I'm going to come back down to my camera raw filter. For the girl, I'm going to double click on this. Remember, we knocked a stop and a quarter off, a stop and a third off. I'm going to dial this back down to only one stop off of her, not the full stop and a third, or in my case, 9/10 of the stop under. And I feel like this is fitting my scene and my chair part better. However, I still don't have that sense of top-heavy light, which this is, which this clearly is. I mean, you can see that there's shadows under the table. So I need to make her darker in this whole scene, the lower part of her darker in here. So I'm going to scroll back up to my two color correction, my two adjustment layers that are on here. I'm going to click on the top one because I'm going to add a curve on top of this to basically make the lower part of her body darker. So I'm going to then add a curve to this, just a regular just a regular curve on this. I'm going to again hover between the curve that I just added and the adjustment layer underneath it, hold down my option key so that I can clip this. Again, I only want this curve impacting the girl. I don't want this impacting my whole scene. So it needs to be clipped. And then I'm going to change the blending mode of this from normal down to luminosity. Because again, I just want to make this whole thing darker, especially the bottom part of her darker. To do that, I'm going to leave the highlights where they are, but I'm going to grab my the lower corner of this curve, the black point of this curve. I'm going to click on that, and I'm actually going to start to drag it forward. And you can see that it's actually making the shadow parts much, much, much darker in here. And you don't need to go far before you really almost are driving this thing completely to black. So this is where I'm going to start. We'll see how this goes. This is now impacting the entire girl. I don't want to impact the entire girl. I only want to impact the lower part of her. So I want the sense that's pretty much from the middle of her chest down starts to gradually get darker. That's what I'm hoping to actually accomplish in this. To do that, I'm going to invert this layer mask. So the layer mask that's actually doing this, I'm going to just hit Command I. It makes it a black layer mask so that the curve is now completely hidden. Then I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. You want to make sure that white is your foreground color so that when we paint with white on this mask, it will actually show that curve and make those areas darker. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to check the edge of my brush. You want a completely soft brush to do this because what I'm basically creating is a circular gradient. That's what I'm going to actually be creating on this. So a completely soft brush, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and then I'm going to hover over this image and I'm going to use my bracket keys to make this brush larger. And what we're looking to do is the very center of my brush is going to be, again, if you think about a hard brush or a soft brush, the very center of your brush is going to be full color when you paint with it. As you start to move towards the edges, you start to get less and less and less of this color. And then finally, when you go beyond the edge of the brush, the brush is doing nothing at all. So I can use that to decide how big of a brush that I want. So I put the center of the brush at her feet because that's where I want this curve to be the darkest. And then I simply use the bracket keys to make my brush larger so that the top edge of the brush hits right below her boobs. So then I'm going to use, again, white as my foreground color, and I'm working on my layer mask right here. You need to hover in this spot and you need to click once. Don't click and drag, don't click and move, don't do anything else. Just make one solid dot. And you can actually see it's now driving that color down considerably more on her feet. Now we need to tweak out the curve to make it correct because it's too dark. So I'm going to click on the curve. This is killing all of my shadows. It's burying all my shadows that move to actually pull this lower line across. So I'm going to back this off a little bit, and then I'm going to grab my midpoint and I'm going to actually drop it down a little bit. So I'm actually going after both slightly in here. And I feel like that part is actually giving me the sense that I want to get from her chest down, and it's working pretty good till you get down to about her legs. Actually, I take that back. I'm going to actually keep this guy where it is right now. And now I take that back. I'm actually going to make it slightly darker on the bottom. So to make it slightly darker on the bottom, simply duplicate this layer. Command J. It'll do all the stuff for you. It's not clipped, so I do need to hover over it to actually clip it. And now my layer mask is incorrect on this part right now. So I'm going to fill this layer mask, the second one, with black completely. Black is my foreground color, so Command Delete will fill it entirely with black. And then I'm going to do this same trick with that brush, but instead of going all the way up to her chest, I'm going to only go from her feet up to like her knees. So I'm going to make this brush considerably smaller. Again, white is still my foreground color. I'm hovering the center of my brush right over her feet, and then the edge of the brush is hitting right about where her knees are, working on the layer mask of that second curve, and click on that, and it actually drives that part down darker as well. Now, there's a mismatch to me when I look at this. I'm looking at the background, at the wall that's on that background. It looks like a garage door. It does not seem to me to be dark enough to match her legs. So I'm going to go back down and fix that. So scroll down to the bottom, select your background layer. We're going to simply put a curve on top of this. You don't need to worry about clipping or anything else because there's nothing underneath it except for that background layer. I'm going to add a curve to this, and then I'm going to grab my targeting adjustment tool. That's the little hand with it's a finger pointing and an arrow going up and down. If you use that tool and then hover over something in your image, you'll see it puts a point on your curve where it really is. So I'm hovering over this, and it's down here at the very end. So what I'm going to simply do, I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to grab my shadow point, the black point that's on the very bottom of my image. I'm going to click and start to drag this slightly to the right. And I feel like just a small bump in here, I've got an input of 8 going to an output of 0, actually matched the bottom of this much better. It was too light to explain what was really happening with her feet on the bottom of this. So this is where I'm at right now. The last thing that I would do in here is put in shadows. Is there anybody in this room who does not know how to do shadows for this girl? Right? Gradient tool, small gradients. Are we all good on that? I don't want to spend my time doing shadows if everybody's comfortable doing this. Are we good on this part? Okay, so the final thing in this, if you like this and this is the place to go, this actually fits pretty well to me. I feel like this is fitting pretty well. If you feel like her face is still just a little bit too hot, we can do one last curve change in here. So I'm going to come back to my adjustment layer stack. Again, the last thing that I did was actually the making her bottom from her knees down darker. I'm going to add one more just adjustment curve to this, just a regular curve on this. So I'll click on this, come out and add an adjustment, just a regular curve on the top of this. Hold down your option key and click so that you clip this curve only to the girl, everything that's underneath this. I'm going to then change, that didn't clip, so hang on one second. Clip this. Actually, that unclipped that one. So again, yeah, clip it all down here. So again, it's clipped to the girl. Change the blending mode of this to luminosity. I'm just wanting to make her face darker. And again, now we're going to do the exact opposite trick that I was talking about, other than using exposure. I'm now going to grab the highlight point of my curve up at the very top right hand corner and start to pull this down. What this will do is actually darken up her face, pull her face down, but not really impact the midtones or the shadows. So I'm going to pull those down a little bit more, and she feels like she fits in that space a little bit more for me right now. So I'm feeling good about this part right now. So this is going to be where I end all of this. However, what I was telling you guys before, the reason you want to do this, I'm going to throw away all of my check layers now, so go ahead and throw away your check layers. So I'm just selecting the very top one, coming down, selecting, holding down the shift key, clicking my luminosity one, hit the delete key, gets rid of them all because I don't need them. They've done their work right now. But with my top adjustment layer selected, again, I would have shadows in here, but my composite is complete now. I'm going to do a merge of all of these. So hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E will make a complete merge of this. So now I've got a single layer that's got everything in it. All my adjustment layers in it, my sizing, my scaling, everything else is actually in here. I'm going to come up to my Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, over to Convert to Smart Object to make this a Smart Object. And then again, I'm going to add my color, my camera raw filter to this. It's a smart object, so this is non-destructive. And I'm going to say, okay, well, I didn't want this to be this yellow, like this really warm color all here, whatever. I didn't want it to be that thing at all. So open up your color slider, grab your color temperature slider, and drag the whole thing over to blue. Oh, that's the color I wanted. I want her to look like she's Day of the Dead. I want it to be, much, much more, change here. I want it to be, but again, we're now changing the composite that was correct together, unified together, and you can do anything you want to with it. Does this make sense? We good on this part? All right. You can cancel that. You can close that up. Oh, before you close it, don't save it. If you want to try just to sort of, well, never mind. For those of you who kept it open, if you do a snapshot, a history snapshot of your image and then go up to the very top, you can actually see the original and compare it to the other one. I'll show you that in the next one that we do. All righty. The next one I want to go after should be a little bit faster. So if we go, again, if you copy down the entire set of composites, you'll be able to find this. If not, go back onto our server to find the next one that we're going to actually try to work on. And the next one I want to try to work on is one done by M. So if you scroll across, it's right in the middle. It looks like a girl standing in front of the picture sculpture that's in Grant Park. If you double click on this one, we'll open this guy up. Looks like I've still got another swimsuit open someplace. And I've got something else that's also open someplace. My math. Okay, so what's right or wrong about this picture? What's your analysis of it? Em, you can jump right in. It's your picture. Color's not great, but again, at least you had the lighting direction part correct, right? If you take a look at the sculpture, there's light that's actually hitting the left side of the sculpture, and then it goes into shadow, right? We just need those things to match and to balance a little bit better, right? So that's all we need to do. But also, the scale of the girl. I mean, that's something that you can debate about on this. In this case, I'm not going to sweat the scale part too much of it because everything around it's sort of abstract. You could say to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to go in and look at the size of this brick, right? But that's not a real, it's not a real construction brick. You can go in and actually do the side. So if you have like a house, somebody standing next to a brick wall of the exterior of a house, you can go in and measure in the United States the thickness of a standard brick in the United. Well, here, let's just do it. Go to here. Go to your any website here, and we're going to put in height, standard height of brick in the U.S. So you'll see right here, it's 2¼ inches tall, big as life. However, you also need to add space for the mortar in a brick, right? So if we add space in the mortar, the space in between the mortar probably is about 1/2 inch. So I'm going to say that my brick height on this, just to show you guys how I would scale this if I really believed that that background was legitimate, I would say that okay, the brick is going to be 2¼ plus the 3/4 inch for the mortar that goes in between that, or not 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch for that. So 2 3/4, that's going to be the size of a brick, right? So again, back to my calculator really quickly. So if I take the girl's height, which is 72 inches, and I divide that by 2 1/4, 2.75, that tells me that the girl should be 26 bricks tall. So then I go into M's image. Now she's way in front of this brick wall. So to scale her correctly, I've got to push her all the way in the back. So that's what I'll do. You guys can go ahead and do this with me. I wasn't going to do this, but we're just going to imagine now that this isn't a sculpture, but this is a real brick wall. So I'm going to hide everybody else. I'm actually going to turn the girl off so I don't even need to see her. I'm going to go into this background back here. I'm going to drag one guideline down on my ruler down to the very base of this. And then I'm going to grab my next one and bring it down and start counting bricks on my way up. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I'm going to stop at 22, drag this down, hover over the the guideline again, hit the V key, you'll get the move tool, and you can continue to do your brick counting. I got to 20, so I'm going to go to 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. This is how tall the girl should be if she's in this background. So I'm going to turn the girl back on, double click on the hand to kick back out. I'm going to rescale. Don't worry, she's not. It's not horrible where she is right now. However, I want to compare this to where M actually had the girl. So I'm going to add 2 more guidelines in here. I'm going to grab my ruler and I'm going to come down and put a guideline right at her toe tips. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the girl back against the sculpture, scale her correctly, and then I'm going to bring her forward and scale her in perspective and bring her back to the point where she was. So I'm going to drag, I've got a guideline that's at her toes. I'm going to drag another guideline that goes over right in the middle between her feet. So I know that this is where her toes need to actually go, is this point right here. So I'm going to move the girl then. Again, she's selected. Command T to actually do the transform dialog box. I'm going to click on the length between width and height. I'm going to then make her considerably smaller. I'm going to drag her into the background and put her feet right down at the base of this. I'm going to drag my anchor point all the way down to the bottom so it's right between her feet. And then again, with width and height still connected, I'm going to drag her up so that she's as tall as she actually needs to be. And there's M's actually got some other control stuff that's actually happening on here. Don't worry about any of those. We're going to get rid of all those. So she isn't scaled correctly now for being in this space back here. But then I need to scale her in perspective. And to scale her in perspective, I need to know where her horizon line is, also where the horizon line of the background is. I have no real good lines to establish where the horizon line of the background is. So I'm simply going to grab this anchor point and I'm going to put it right up in about the middle near her crotch area. Again, it's just a general thing. I don't really have references, though, that are going to throw this off. So we're just going to leave it there. Holding down the Shift key then and the Option key to scale in perspective, I'm simply going to grab and bring her forward till she actually lands on that mark. And then I'm going to move her left to right because, again, she's scaled correctly on this. So I'm moving her left to right so that her feet hit that intersection again. And then I'm going to say OK to this. She has now been scaled correctly if those bricks in the sculpture were indeed bricks that you had in the United States. For all I know, those things are 5 inches tall. I don't even know what they are. They're not bricks. But does that make sense what we just did? Okay, so I got a lot of guidelines on here. I want to get rid of these guidelines. So up to the view menu again, down to guides, and we are going to clear guides. So the problem that I've got right now is there's a bunch of other things that M has actually put controls on here, adjustment layers on here. So I'm going to get rid of them all. I'm going to select the one that was on the very top. I'm going to go up to the very top and check on my check layers and simply delete all of those. I'm also going to get rid of the shadows. So she's got 3 shadows that are working on here. I'm going to get rid of those guys. So now basically all I've got is I've got the original virgin girl on the very bottom. I've got the background that's on the top, and it's a smart object. That's encouraging. I'm hoping it's raw. And then I've got the girl that's sitting on top, but she is now scaled correctly to this background. So my next move in all of this is I'm going to double click on this smart object that is the background and see what's really going on in here. So it is not a smart object based on raw data. It's simply a smart object that's been protected, and I'm fine with that. So I'm going to close this up. Still on that smart object, I'm going to see what, again, Photoshop thinks I should be doing. I need to process this correctly. So I'm going to come up to the filter menu, down to Camera Raw Filter. It will only open up this image. Do I have something in here I can white balance on? Say what? The splash probably, so let's just see what the splash actually does. I'm going to click on the white balance tool and come over to the splash part and click on it. And you can see it adds a little bit of warmth to this, but that is now neutral color, which is the same color as my figure. So instead of me trying to guess at what color the figure should be to match this background, I know that if I color neutralize the background, she is already color neutralized. She was done that way in the studio. The two will actually match. So this helps me. I might have to tweak the color a little bit, but I'm much, much, much closer. However, what we haven't done on this is to see what Photoshop thinks the exposure on this should be. So I'm going to come over and click on the Auto button at the very top, right underneath your histogram. And you can see in this case, it opens up the whole shadow side of this, which is important to me because this shadow side that is open on the sculpture needs to match the shadow side of her. And I know I've got detail in her face. I know I've got detail on the shadow side of her legs. So when I look at this, this actually seems to me to be much more likely to actually match her than if you hit Command Z and undo that and have the much darker contrast to your version of it. So I am going to accept this auto lightness on here, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. So now I'm actually getting closer in here. However, the mistake I've got right now is that where she is standing is in the middle of the shadow of some tree. So she would not have this side light on her. I need to move her. I need to push her back so that she is actually in the sidewalk part where the light's actually hitting her. There's no way I'm going to actually be able to match this. I think what you tried to do, it looked like, were you trying to paint the tree shadow on her? Very clever, almost impossible to do. But because again, light reacts to a three-dimensional object differently, so that the shadows, you find the shadows will only happen on the light part of her body. They won't have any impact on the dark part because the dark part is already in shadow, but it's really hard to paint that. Yeah, but so anyway, but you've still got both in here, so it's going to make it possible for us to do that. All right, so I'm going to select the girl again. We need to move her back in space, but we need to move her in perspective. So to do that, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Again, I'm going to leave the, because I don't have a reference for where her horizon line really is, I'm going to leave it right where it is. I'm going to leave it right where her crotch is. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and the Option key and grab one of the lower corner handles and just start to push her back till I know she is squarely in the light. And even just doing that move, look at the difference. No way I can believe it where she is up here in the front part, but the minute she gets back into that light, I start believing this more and more. Don't you guys agree? All right. So this is how I'm going to actually take it from here. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. Now there's a couple of other changes that we can actually make in this. Again, the shadow to me on the side of her face actually is matching the shadow on the sides of this wall pretty well. If I felt like I needed to lift the shadows a little bit more, again, I would change this composite. Actually, that's weird. I could have sworn that was a smart object, because I've been doing all these transforms back and forth of this figure right now. This was never a smart object, so all of those guys are destructive in here. That's a problem for me. How do I fix this right now? I'm late in the game. Again, I don't really want to I think I've gone through so much of this. I don't really want to just completely redo this thing, right? All right, so here's how you fix this. Double click on the hand. Is all of yours, your composite body number one, not a smart object, a regular one? Yeah, okay, so we've done all of this stuff, whatever. That's destructive. So, but I've got the Virgin sitting right down at the very bottom. So I'm simply gonna go down to the bottom, select the Virgin. It is a smart object. Command J will make a copy of it. Drag that copy all the way up to the very top of your image. It's got to go up above the one that we've been working on. So I've now got the old one that I've worried that I've destroyed too much. It's too destructive. I've just been banging around on it. I'm going to turn on the one that's on the very top. I'm going to lower the opacity because the one that's on the top is a smart object. So I can do all the transforming in the world to that. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the length between their width and height. I'm going to actually push her to the side so that I can see her a little bit better. And I'm just going to scale her down so that she actually matches the girl on the right or on the left. So they're pretty close in the same size right here. If you want the exact same scaling I had, the girl is now 83.59%. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. I'm going to then hit the V key to slide her over on top of the other figure, and then I'm going to throw away the composite body that I was worried about trashing, and then raise the opacity back up. So it's just a quick way. I've now got a true smart object version of this, and I'm actually good to go. I'm off to the races. Makes sense to everyone. Okay, again, shadows would go a long way to pushing this in here. I like what's happening on her face. The one thing that I'll say is that when you look at the light that's actually hitting the side of the sculpture, it seems to be, it's later in the day, and it seems to be smacking it kind of hard. The only thing that I might consider doing on this, I think she's pretty close and matching it right now. Again, we can run our check layers on top of this. We'll see. So I'm going to go over to my actions palette. I'm going to run check layers on top of this, turn off the color one, and then go back down to your luminosity one and turn this on. And when I look at her, she seems pretty close to this. However, I feel like in some ways she'd be slightly brighter. Does that make sense to you guys? It's an emotional reaction, if anything, or an intellectual reaction that I'm actually doing here. I'm trying to imagine me standing in Grant Park with that kind of day, bunch of kids around, sun setting, it's pretty hard sun. I feel like she would be a little bit snappier in all of this. So to do that, again, this is not going to be an adjustment that we make using camera raw filter. We will use this when doing a curve. So I'm going to simply come down and add a curve to this. I'm going to hover between the curve that I just added, the adjustment layer, and the girl. Hold down my Option key and click to clip this curve to the girl. So this is only going to impact the girl now and not the whole scene. I'm going to change the blending mode of that curve down to luminosity because I don't want it to shift my color. And then I'm simply going to grab the highlight point, the point of my curve that's on the very top of my curves box on the right hand side. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to start pushing this to the left. And you can see as you start going to the left, it goes after the highlights first, which is what I want to do. I don't really want to open up her skirt at all or her legs, that kind of stuff. I just want to open up her face a little bit more. So I'm hitting it a little bit harder. So in my case, I've got an input of 229 to 255 if you want the same one. I'm going to turn this on and off while I'm in here, and you can see it's popping that face a little bit harder. I feel like that's a little too hard, so I'm going to back this off a little bit more. And that feels about right to me. Yep. So again, I've got a 234 to a 255 if you want the same curve that I've got. I'm going to turn off my luminosity check layer and then again turn this guy on and off and see what I think about that. And it feels just a little bit more like she's in that space. Don't you guys agree? All right, really quickly, let's just see what our color check layer looks like. I'm going to turn this on. So there's some blue in this, but she's really surrounded and dominated by the, again, and I'm looking really more at her skin tone in here. There's a lot of red in this, and I feel like it needs to, again, I'm thinking sunshine, it needs to be warmed up a little bit more, and I know red is a really warm color, but that's what I'm going to go with in here. So I am going to do a small color adjustment on this. So again, hovering over the curve layer that we just added to make her skin tone a little bit lighter, I'm going to add a color balance adjustment layer above that. So click on it up to color balance. I'm going to hover between this curve I just added, the adjustment layer I just added, and the one underneath it. Hold down my Option key so that I'm clipping my color balance to the girl. Change the blend mode of that to color. And then I'm going to start to push up the yellow just a little bit. So I'm going to grab the blue-yellow slider and start to push in the direction. And I'm also going to see what happens. Yeah, no, I'm going to leave that red slider alone. I'm just going to push my yellow slider over. I've got like a plus 30 in here. Again, you can turn this color on and off, and you can see it's pretty serious adjustment that we've actually made in here. So we'll see how this looks. I'm going to turn off my color check layers. I'm going to then come back to my color balance layer and turn this on and off. And I do feel like it's taken out a little bit of that red and put in a little bit more yellow. That feels a little bit better to me. Then finally, I'm going to check my saturation layer. And again, looking at her saturation layer, she seems too saturated. Ignore the skirt. The skirt is always going to be hyperly saturated. There's no, it's a pure yellow skirt. So or dress. So that's not going to really matter. It's really more about her skin tone that I'm looking at, and I'm trying to imagine it, measuring it to the bricks that are in the back. She seems a little bit lighter than the bricks that are in the back. So I'm going to come back down to my color adjustment layer. I'm going to add a hue saturation curve above that. I'm going to clip it, change its blending mode to saturation, and then drop the saturation slightly. So I'm down to like a minus 14. We'll see what it looks like. I'm going to turn my saturation check layer on and off. And all of a sudden now she is falling directly into this space. So really quickly, just because we can really fast, I'm going to go ahead and throw a shadow on this. So to get a shadow on this, come down to the composite that is the girl that we've been actually working with. I'm going to command click to load her as a selection. I'm going to then come down to my background layer. I'm going to make it active and then add a blank layer in between the two. Double click on this and call it shadow. with the shadow layer active and this selection outline of her active. Black is my foreground color. I'm going to fill this with black. So holding down the control key and clicking on the delete key will actually fill it with black. You can't see it because it's directly behind her. Command D to deselect. Actually, that did not happen because I'm looking at my shadow layer and it did not fill with that. So again, command click to load her as a selection again with my shadow layer active. Black is my foreground color. Option delete. That did fill it with black. Command D to deselect. And then I need to transform my shadow. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Actually, take that back. Cancel out of that. So hit the circle at the top with a little slash through it to jump out. We need to go to the pasteboard because when we do shadow work like this, a lot of times your control handles end up outside of your image. So I need to make sure I can get to them. So hit the F key once. It gets us to the pasteboard. And then Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I'm going to drag the anchor point and bring it right down between her toes because, again, when we do a transform here, I'm going to rotate the shadow. And if I rotate it with the anchor point at her crotch, it rotates like a clock hands around it. So her feet will come up on the left-hand side. I don't want that. I want everything to shift to the right. So then I'm going to hover outside of the transform bounding box, click and drag down. Then I'm going to massively change this. If you think about the sunlight coming across her body, her skirt is flared and the bottom of her dress is flared and we see this really big heavy thing in the front. But if you imagine turning and seeing that from the side, her dress is going to be relatively narrow. So we need to compress this shadow quite a bit. So I'm going to hover over the control handle that's at the very top, holding down the option key because I want to crush it from both sides. I want the top to come down, but I want the bottom to come up again. Again, I want to crush this evenly. So holding down your option key will allow you to do that, and we can compress this whole thing. And this is more the kind of shadow that we're really looking for here. Again, something that's much, much, much thinner because that light is coming across the side of her body. It's not hitting the front of her body and going back. So I'm pretty happy with where this one is right now. I'm going to zoom in and take a look and see what it looks like at her feet. I want this to be coming off of her feet, and it's not. It's coming off of one of her feet, but not the other. So I'm going to simply click and bring it up so that it looks like it's coming off of both of her feet. That seems a little bit better to me. I'm going to zip back out and sort of see what that did and what I'm actually seeing. I'm going to compress this shadow even a little bit more, and that feels a little bit better to me. I'm going to again check and see what that did around her feet. So I'm going to pull it back down a little bit for her feet, and this part actually looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the check mark to say okay to that, but then I've got some cleaning up to do. So you'll see that you can still see the space between both of her legs in this shadow. You would not actually have that. Her body would be creating one solid shadow. So working on this shadow layer, I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make it a completely hard brush. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Black is my foreground color. I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm simply going to paint the space between her legs. Do not go outside of those lines. Those lines actually matter. So I'm just going to paint the space between her legs to make this more cohesive. That part worked for me. So then finally what I've got that I'm actually got to work with in here as well is that shadow's actually going to get softer as it travels away from her. So right now my shadow is complete, but I'm going to turn this into a smart object. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object, because now I can run a blurring filter on this, but the blurring filter will have a mask, which will allow me to actually make the area of the shadow closer to her feet sharper and the area further away softer. So again, I'm going to come up to the filter menu, down to blur, and again, you guys already know this about me. I use motion blur instead of Gaussian blur for shadows, but I also do the shadow blur to go straight across the shadows. So I'm setting my the angle of my shadow so that I feel like it cuts across it so I can see the shadowy part on both sides. I've got a distance of 31 and an angle of a -63 if you want the same one I've got. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. But now this shadow is blurred all the way. I don't want this blurred next to her feet. It should be much sharper at her feet. So click on the Smart Filter Mask. Hit the G key to get the gradient tool. In the drop-down menu at the top of your options palette, in your drop-down menu part, make sure it is Classic Gradient. In the icon that's right next to it, the type of gradient, click on that drop-down. Open up the Basics panel and click on the very first one, which is foreground to background. And then finally, in the 5 icons that sit right next to it, to the right of that, the one that you want to grab is a linear gradient. It's the first one on the left. And then come down, and what will happen now is that if I click and drag across, I'm starting with my foreground color going to my background. Well, my foreground color is white, which means that the area that's blurred is going to be right next to her feet. So I'm going to hit the X key to actually give me a black as my foreground color. And now I'm going to click and just start to drag out for the gradient. And you can see as soon as I do that, the area right by her feet becomes extremely sharp. The areas we start to get to the background actually starts to get softer and softer and softer, which is what I want to actually have happen in here. Does this make sense to everyone? Are we good on this part? Okay. Then finally, I need the shadow to actually fade as it's going further away from her. So I'm going to click on this shadow area that I've got right here. I'm going to click on the thing that's the word shadow. I'm going to add a layer mask to this, just a blank layer mask on this. Still with my gradient tool, I'm going to do the very same trick. I'm going to click and drag across, and you'll see it's now fading the shadow by her feet. So I'm going to hit the X key to flip my foreground and background colors. You don't need to hit undo. Every single time you drag a gradient out, it overwrites the one that you just did. So even though the one I've got on this layer mask is incorrect, if I click and drag another one, it will be correct. So I'm going to zip back out. You need to actually pull this a considerable distance and just see what you feel like it looks like here. And so I feel like that's actually working kind of well, but look at how dark the shadow is relative to her position right here. So it needs to come out more than that. So you can, again, drag gradients beyond the edge of your image so that you're making that background even sharper. It needs to go even sharper still, so I'm going to drag it out even more. And that seems like this works much, much, much better for me. It's much closer to what it actually should be in here. And then finally, what I need to do is I need this to match the color of the real shadows that are in here. Right now, if you look at the difference, the real shadows got a lot of blue in it, and the one that I've got is perfectly neutral. That's because it was based on black. So I'm going to hold down my, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my, this shadow, and even though it is already a smart object, I'm going to make it another smart object. I'm going to nest it so that I end up with something that's got all of these filters and gradients applied to it. So simply hover over that icon that is the shadow. I've selected to make it active. Come up to your layer menu, down to Smart Objects, down to Convert to Smart Object. And you'll see now that this shadow has actually got all of the qualities that we wanted in it. So if you hold down your Option key and just click on the eyeball, you can see its sharpness changes, its focus changes, all of that changes. All of that is built into this shadow. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and click to bring it back on again. I'm going to then load this shadow as a selection. Command-click loads it as a selection. And then I'm going to add a regular curve on top of this. And so now what has happened is that the regular curve has inherited that selection as a shadow. As a mask. Does that make sense? I'm going to turn off, well, first off, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put down 2 color sampler points. So again, I'm going to go up to what is now the ruler and come down to color sampler point. And I'm going to pick a general shadow in the middle. So I'm going to pick something on this girl. I'm going to move this shadow, something kind of right around where the highlights are. Not the highlights, sort of like where it's making that transition from really dark to the much lighter version of it. I'm going to put one point down there, and then I'm going to put another point sort of like right in the middle of a real shadow. And now you can see the difference in these two. So what I need to do, I'm going to turn off my fake shadow, that the smart object that made this. I'm only going to do this work in the curve. You can see in your layout points right here, I've got a 150, a 140, and a 131 for the area that I want to be a shadow. And then I've got a 47, 48, and a 59. That's telling me there's a lot of blue in this real shadow. So I'm going to simply, with my curve, the mask is already in place. It's going to do its job. But with the curve selected, I'm going to grab the highlight point and start to drag straight down. And I'm looking for my readout. I want to get my overall readout, the highest number, to a 59. So I'm going to just keep dragging down until all of those numbers start to get close to 59. So I've got a 59, but that took my blue to a 51. So I'm going to drag this back up until my blues actually equal each other. So I've got a 59 for my blue on the shadow that I want to be making, and then it's matching the 59 of the real blue. Now I just need to change my red and green values so that they match the real shadow values as well. So I'm going to go to my green, my red one. I'm going to grab the highlight slider and drag that 68 needs to be a 47. And then my green also needs to be a 48. So I'm just going to drag that down until I get to 48. So now the colors of my shadow on the girl match the real shadows that are actually sitting here. And I am going to double click on the hand to get back out. I'm going to hit the F key again to go to my black pasteboard. F key one more time to go back. Command H to hide all those points. If you feel like that this shadow area in here is still too dark now, and I feel like it actually is a little bit too dark, all I'm going to do is drop the opacity of the curve. This curve is building the whole shadow of the girl. I'm just going to drop the opacity. It's just a quick, easy way to go about doing this. And I'm going to leave it at that. Then I'm going to come over to my history palette. I'm going to click and add a history snapshot. I'll just leave it named snapshot number 1. I'll go all the way up to the very top. We can click on M's original image. It's the very first top snapshot. This is where she was. And this is where we are. So, again, you guys have peeked behind the curtain. You know this, but I'm telling you right now, if you haul this thing out to anybody in that digital lab, any of your friends in the digital print lab, anybody, anything like that, whatever, and say, you know, it's just really weird. I wish she wasn't on that, you know, just like on the center of this thing. I mean, just start talking about something else and just ask them what they find is wrong or right about the image, whatever. They will never in a million years tell you it's composited and it looks awful. Look at this. Yes, no, good, bad, killer. Is this all making sense to everyone? All right, guys. That gets us through today. So again, for next week, just FYI, next week, let me actually stop the video really quickly. Hang on one second.